The smell of roasted turkey and fresh-baked pies filled the air in John Miller's perfectly manicured backyard. 50 guests mingled on the sprawling lawn of his Connecticut mansion, champagne glasses sparkling in the autumn sunlight. This was John's annual Thanksgiving celebration, a lavish display of gratitude that had become legendary among New York's elite. But none of the wealthy guests noticed the small figure crouched behind the oak tree at the edge of the property. 9-year-old Alex pressed his thin body against the rough bark, his stomach growling as he watched the abundance spread across the white-clothed tables. Mountains of food sat untouched, while adults in expensive clothes laughed and chatted, their plates barely touched. Alex had been walking for hours, drawn by the incredible smells. His little sister hadn't eaten in 2 days, and his mom was too sick to leave the homeless shelter where they'd been staying. Desperation gave him. While the guests were distracted by John's speech about gratitude, Alex slipped between the servers and reached for a dinner roll. That's when a strong hand gently touched his shoulder. "Not a word," John Miller whispered, his voice barely audible. Alex froze, certain he was about to be dragged away by security. But what happened next would change both their lives forever. If you're someone who appreciates emotional stories, we'd love for you to like and subscribe. There's more to come that might move you too. John Miller had built his fortune by paying attention to details that others missed. In boardrooms, he noticed when someone avoided eye contact during negotiations. At charity galas, he spotted the politicians who were more interested in photo opportunities than actual causes. And today, during his annual Thanksgiving celebration, he noticed a small pair of eyes watching his guests from behind the massive oak tree at the edge of his property. The boy couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. He was thin, too thin, with worn sneakers that had holes in them and a jacket that was clearly meant for someone much larger. But what caught John's attention wasn't the child's appearance. It was the way he watched the food tables with an intensity that spoke of genuine hunger, not mere curiosity. John had been giving his traditional Thanksgiving speech to his 50 guests, talking about gratitude and abundance, when he'd spotted the boy. Now, as he continued speaking about being thankful for their blessings, he found himself distracted by the small figure who was clearly calculating whether he could reach the food without being seen. "We gather here today not just to celebrate our success," John continued, his voice carrying across the perfectly manicured lawn, "but to remember that we have a responsibility to share our good fortune with those less fortunate." The irony wasn't lost on him that at that very moment, one of those less fortunate was crouched behind a tree, too afraid to ask for help. John's guests, a collection of business partners, politicians, and society figures, nodded approvingly at his words while barely touching the elaborate spread that his catering team had spent days preparing. Whole turkeys sat on silver platters, their golden skin glistening under the outdoor heaters. Tables groaned under the weight of side dishes, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, and more varieties of pie than any gathering could possibly consume. Meanwhile, behind the oak tree, the boy was making his move. Alex had been watching the party for over an hour, studying the patterns of the servers and guests. He'd noticed that there was a blind spot near the dessert table where the large floral arrangements blocked the view from most of the seating area. If he was quick and quiet, he could grab some food and be gone before anyone noticed. His stomach cramped with hunger as he crept forward. The smells were intoxicating, rich, warm, and abundant in a way that seemed impossible after days of rationing small portions of stale bread and whatever free food the shelter could provide. Alex thought about his little sister Emma, only 6 years old, who'd been crying from hunger that morning before he'd left to search for food. Their mom had been too sick to get out of bed for 3 days now, running a fever that wouldn't break and coughing so hard it scared both children. The shelter's clinic was overwhelmed, and they'd been told to wait unless it was a true emergency. "Just a few pieces," Alex whispered to himself as he reached the edge of the food tables. Just enough for Emma and Mom. He'd done this before at other events around the city, weddings, corporate parties, any gathering where there was excess food and distracted guests. He'd learned to move quickly, take only what wouldn't be missed, and disappear before anyone noticed. It wasn't stealing, he told himself. It was survival. Alex's small hand reached for a dinner roll, then grabbed a piece of turkey from the serving platter. He wrapped them quickly in a napkin and stuffed them into his oversized jacket pocket. Then he reached for another roll and another piece of turkey. His hands moved with practiced efficiency born from necessity. That's when he felt the hand on his shoulder. Alex's heart nearly stopped. He turned around slowly, expecting to see a security guard or an angry adult ready to call the police. Instead, he found himself looking up into the eyes of the man who'd been giving the speech. A tall, well-dressed man with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "Not a word," John Miller said quietly, his voice so low that only Alex could hear him. Alex stood frozen, the napkin-wrapped food still clutched in his small hand. He waited for the yelling to start, for this man to announce to all the fancy guests that there was a thief among them. But John didn't call out. Instead, he knelt down so he was at Alex's eye level. "What's your name, son?" John asked gently. "Alex," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "How old are you, Alex?" 9. John nodded, glancing at the food in Alex's hands, then at the boy's thin frame and worn clothes. "Are you hungry?" Alex nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. He'd been caught, and now everything would be ruined. They'd probably ban him from this area, maybe call the police, maybe even get him and his family kicked out of the shelter. "When did you last eat?" John asked. "Yesterday morning," Alex admitted. "There was oatmeal at the shelter, but they ran out before Emma could get any." "Who's Emma?" "My little sister. She's 6. Alex's voice got even smaller. "She's really hungry. And Mom's sick. I was trying to get food for them." John felt something crack open in his chest. Here was a 9-year-old boy, risking getting caught and possibly arrested, not for himself, but for his sick mother and hungry sister. While John's guests complained about the temperature of the wine or the placement of their chairs, this child was carrying the weight of his family's survival on his small shoulders. "Alex, I want you to listen to me carefully," John said, still speaking quietly so none of the guests would overhear. "You're not in trouble, okay? You're not going to get in trouble." Alex looked at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "But I want to help you properly. Not just with food for today, but with making sure your family has what they need." John glanced around at his guests, who were still mingling and chatting, oblivious to the drama playing out near the dessert table. "Can you wait for me by that tree where you were hiding? Just for a few minutes while I finish up here?" "You're not going to call the police?" Alex asked. "I'm not going to call anyone except maybe a doctor for your mom," John said firmly. "Will you trust me for a few minutes?" Alex studied John's face, looking for signs of deception, but all he saw was genuine concern and kindness, expressions he hadn't seen from an adult in months. "Okay," Alex whispered. "Good. And Alex, keep that food. You earned it by being brave enough to take care of your family." As Alex made his way back to the oak tree, John stood up and looked out at his guests with new eyes. They were good people, most of them, but they lived in a world so separate from Alex's reality that they might as well have been on different planets. They talked about charity and giving back. But when was the last time any of them had encountered actual poverty? When had they last met a child who'd gone days without a proper meal? John walked back to his guests with a new sense of purpose. His prepared speech about gratitude suddenly felt hollow and inadequate. Instead, he found himself speaking from the heart. "Friends, I want to change direction for a moment," he said, his voice carrying across the lawn. "We've been talking about gratitude and abundance, and I think we need to remember what those words really mean." His guests turned their attention back to him, sensing something different in his tone. Gratitude isn't just about acknowledging what we have. It's about acting on that acknowledgement. It's about recognizing that our abundance means nothing if we don't share it with those who have nothing. John glanced toward the oak tree where Alex was waiting, still clutching the napkin full of food. "Today, I've been reminded that there are children in our own community who haven't eaten in days. Families who are choosing between food and shelter, between medicine and rent. And while we stand here surrounded by more food than we can possibly consume, they're wondering where their next meal will come from." The guests shifted uncomfortably, not sure where this was leading. "So I want to propose something," John continued. Instead of just talking about gratitude, let's act on it. Let's make this Thanksgiving about more than just our own blessings. Let's make it about extending those blessings to others. John looked directly at several of his wealthiest guests. I'm going to be working with some local families who need help, and I'd like to invite all of you to join me. Not just with donations, though those are welcome, but with actual involvement. With getting to know the people we're helping and understanding their stories. As John concluded his impromptu speech, he could see that his words had affected his guests differently than his usual prepared remarks. Some looked thoughtful, others seemed moved, and a few appeared genuinely inspired to take action. But John's focus was on the small boy waiting by the tree, and the family that was counting on him to bring home food. In a few minutes, he would learn more about Alex's story, about the circumstances that had led a 9-year-old to risk stealing food from strangers. And that knowledge would change not just how John thought about his wealth and privilege, but how he chose to use them. As he excused himself from his guests and walked toward the oak tree, John realized that Alex had given him something more valuable than any business deal or investment return. He'd given him a chance to live up to the words he'd been speaking about gratitude and generosity for years. Now it was time to prove that those words could become actions. As John approached the oak tree where Alex waited, he could see the boy's entire body tensing with each step. Alex clutched the napkin-wrapped food like a lifeline, his eyes darting between John and the path that led back to the street. Every instinct was probably telling him to run, but he'd given his word to wait. "Thank you for staying," John said gently as he reached the tree. "I know that took courage." Alex didn't respond, but John could see him evaluating whether this man was truly safe or just better at hiding his intentions than other adults had been. "Alex, I want to help your family, but first I need to understand your situation better. Can you tell me about your mom? What kind of sick is she?" "She's been coughing really bad for like a week," Alex said quietly, his voice barely audible over the distant laughter of John's guests. "And she has a fever that won't go away. Sometimes she can't catch her breath, and it scares Emma." John's expression grew more concerned. Those symptoms could indicate pneumonia or another serious respiratory infection, conditions that could be life-threatening without proper medical care. "How long have you been at the shelter?" John asked. 3 weeks. Before that, we were staying in our car, but it broke down and we couldn't afford to fix it. The shelter said we could stay for 30 days, but that's almost up." Alex's voice got even smaller. "Mom keeps saying she's going to find work as soon as she feels better, but she can barely get out of bed." John felt anger building in his chest. Not at Alex or his family, but at a system that put families with young children in such impossible situations. Here was a single mother, clearly ill, trying to care for 2 small children while homeless, and a 9-year-old boy who'd taken on the responsibility of feeding his family. "What about your dad?" John asked carefully. Alex shook his head. "He left when Emma was a baby. Mom said he couldn't handle having kids. She's been taking care of us by herself since then." "Your mom sounds like a strong woman." "She is. She worked 2 jobs before she got sick. She cleaned offices at night and worked at a grocery store during the day. But then the grocery store closed down, and she couldn't find another day job that worked with her night schedule." Alex looked down at his worn sneakers. "That's when we lost our apartment. Mom cried for 3 days, but she told me and Emma that we were going to be okay, that it was just temporary." John realized he was getting a glimpse into a world he'd never truly understood, despite all his charitable donations and speeches about helping the less fortunate. This wasn't about people who'd made poor choices or weren't trying hard enough. This was about a family that had been knocked down by circumstances beyond their control and was struggling to get back up. "Alex, what's the name of the shelter where you're staying?" "Hope Haven. It's about 2 miles from here. That's why it took me so long to walk here." John knew Hope Haven. His company had donated money to them several times over the years, but he'd never visited, never seen the actual conditions or met the families who stayed there. It had always been easier to write a check and assume that solved the problem. "I want to meet your mom and Emma," John said. "I want to make sure your mom gets proper medical care, and I want to help your family find stable housing." Alex looked up at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Why would you do that? You don't even know us." It was a fair question, and John took a moment to consider his answer. Why was he willing to get personally involved in this family's problems? He'd encountered homeless people before, had been approached by people asking for help, and he'd usually given them some money and moved on with his day. What made this situation different? Because you reminded me of something important, John said finally. You reminded me that being grateful for what I have means nothing if I'm not willing to share it with people who need help. But there are lots of people who need help. Why us? John smiled at the boy's intelligence. Even at 9 years old, Alex was asking the kind of pointed questions that many adults wouldn't think to ask. You're right. There are lots of people who need help. But sometimes you meet someone at exactly the right moment, and you realize that you have the power to make a real difference in their life. That's what happened when I saw you today. Alex was quiet for a moment, processing this explanation. What if Mom doesn't want help? She's really proud. She doesn't like taking charity. It's not charity, John said firmly. It's people helping people. And sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing someone can do, especially when they have children depending on them. Can I ask you something? Alex said. Of course. Are you really rich like everyone says rich people are? Like, with lots of money and houses and stuff? John almost smiled at the directness of the question. Yes, I have been very fortunate financially. Then why don't you just give money to the shelter so they can help everyone? Another excellent question. John realized that this 9-year-old was challenging him to think more deeply about how he used his wealth and privilege. I do give money to shelters and other organizations, John said. But money alone doesn't solve all problems. Sometimes people need individual attention, personal relationships, someone who cares about them specifically. Does that make sense? Alex nodded slowly. Like how Mom takes care of me and Emma differently because we need different things? Exactly like that. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. John was struck by how mature Alex was for his age, a maturity born from necessity and responsibility that no 9-year-old should have to carry. Alex, I want to ask you to do something that might be scary, John said. The boy tensed again, and John quickly continued. I want you to let me drive you back to the shelter so I can meet your mom. I want to bring food for your family and other families there, and I want to arrange for your mom to see a doctor today. Today? But it's Thanksgiving. There are doctors who work on holidays, especially for emergencies. And Alex, your mom being sick for a week without proper medical care is an emergency. Alex looked back toward the party, where John's guests were still eating and laughing, completely unaware of the conversation taking place under the oak tree. What about your party? All those people? They'll be fine without me for a while. This is more important. For the first time since John had caught him taking food, Alex smiled. A small, tentative smile, but genuine. Okay, he said. But what if Mom gets mad at me for talking to a stranger? Then we'll explain together that sometimes strangers can become friends, and friends help each other when they need it. John led Alex toward the house, stopping first to speak with his catering manager. Within minutes, he'd arranged for several complete Thanksgiving meals to be packaged up, along with extra food that could be distributed to other families at the shelter. As they loaded the food into John's car, Alex watched with wide eyes. This is enough food for like 20 families. Good, John said, because there are probably 20 families at Hope Haven who could use a proper Thanksgiving dinner. During the drive to the shelter, Alex opened up more about his family's situation. He told John about how his mom used to read to him and Emma every night, even when she was exhausted from working 2 jobs. He talked about how Emma still asked when they were going home to their old apartment, not understanding that it was gone forever. He described how his mom had taught him to be brave and to take care of his sister, but how scared he was that she wasn't getting better. She tries to hide it when she feels really bad, Alex said as they pulled into the shelter's parking lot. But I can tell when she's worse because she doesn't sing anymore. She used to sing while she cooked or cleaned, but she hasn't sung in weeks. John felt his throat tighten with emotion. This family had lost so much: their home, their stability, their health. But what struck him most was hearing about the small joys that had been taken away too. A mother who no longer felt well enough to sing. A 6-year-old who didn't understand why her world had changed so dramatically. As they walked toward the shelter's entrance, John realized that his comfortable life was about to be challenged in ways he'd never experienced. He was about to meet people whose struggles were immediate and visceral, not abstract problems that could be solved with donations and good intentions. But Alex had trusted him enough to bring him here, and John was determined to prove that trust was well placed. Whatever this family needed, medical care, housing, emotional support, or just someone who saw them as individuals rather than statistics, he was going to provide it. The automatic doors of Hope Haven opened in front of them, and John stepped into a world that would change his understanding of poverty, resilience, and what it truly meant to be grateful for the blessings in his life. Hope Haven wasn't what John had expected. Despite his donations over the years, he'd somehow imagined something more institutional, more sterile. Instead, he found himself in a converted warehouse that had been transformed into a surprisingly warm and welcoming space. The walls were painted in soft colors, there were children's drawings taped up everywhere, and the smell of cooking food mingled with industrial disinfectant. But what struck him most was the people. Families sat in small groups throughout the main area, mothers helping children with coloring books, fathers playing quiet games with their kids, elderly people reading or simply watching the activity around them. These weren't the faceless homeless people he'd imagined. These were individuals with stories, with relationships, with dignity that remained intact despite their circumstances. Alex led John through the main area toward a section marked Family Rooms. As they walked, John noticed how other residents nodded at Alex, how a few adults asked quietly how his mom was feeling, how a little girl waved shyly from across the room. This wasn't just a shelter for Alex. It was a community. "That's Mrs. Garcia," Alex said, pointing to an older woman who was helping several children with what looked like homework. "She used to be a teacher before she lost her apartment. She helps kids with schoolwork now." "And that's Mr. Johnson," Alex continued, indicating a man in his 40s who was reading a story to a group of young children. "He tells really good bedtime stories. Emma loves the one about the dragon who learns to share." John realized that Alex wasn't just surviving in this place. He'd found ways to thrive, to build relationships, to create normalcy for himself and his sister within circumstances that would have overwhelmed most adults. They reached a door marked Family Room 12, and Alex knocked softly. "Mom? It's me. I brought someone to meet you." The voice that answered was weak but warm. "Come in, baby." John followed Alex into a small room that contained 2 sets of bunk beds, a small table with 2 chairs, and a tiny area that served as a kitchenette. On one of the lower bunks, a woman who couldn't have been more than 30 was lying down, covered with several thin blankets. Her face was flushed with fever, and John could hear the congestion in her breathing from across the room. On the floor beside the bed, a little girl with pigtails was playing with a doll that looked like it had been loved for many years. She looked up when they entered, her eyes going wide when she saw the stranger with her brother. "Mom, this is Mr. Miller," Alex said. "He's the man I told you about. He wants to help us." The woman, who John assumed was Alex's mother, struggled to sit up, trying to compose herself despite obviously feeling terrible. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'm Lisa, and this is Emma. Alex, you shouldn't have bothered this man." "He's not bothered, Mom," Alex said quickly. "He brought food for everyone, and he wants you to see a doctor." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and John could see the mix of gratitude and embarrassment on her face. Pride was clearly warring with desperation, and desperation was winning. "Ma'am," John said gently, "I'm John Miller. Alex showed incredible courage today, and I'd like to help your family if you'll let me." "I don't understand," Lisa said, looking between John and Alex. "What happened today?" Alex looked uncomfortable, clearly not wanting to admit to his mother that he'd been stealing food. John recognized the boy's dilemma and stepped in. "Alex came to my Thanksgiving celebration," John said carefully. "He was hungry, and he was worried about you and Emma. He impressed me with how much he cares about his family." It wasn't exactly the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Alex shot John a grateful look. "We don't take charity," Lisa said firmly, though her voice was weak. "I've always worked for what my kids need." "I can see that," John said, settling into one of the small chairs. Alex told me about your 2 jobs, about how hard you've worked to take care of your children. But sometimes life knocks us down through no fault of our own. And accepting help isn't charity. It's just people taking care of each other. Emma had abandoned her doll and was now standing beside her mother's bed, studying John with the frank curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Are you really rich?" she asked suddenly. "Emma," Lisa said, mortified. John laughed. "It's okay. Yes, Emma, I've been very fortunate with money." "Do you have a big house?" "I do." "With lots of food?" "More food than I could ever eat by myself." Emma nodded seriously, processing this information. "Mama says rich people don't usually care about poor people." Lisa looked like she wanted to disappear into the thin mattress, but John found Emma's honesty refreshing. "You know what, Emma? Your mama is often right about that. A lot of rich people don't pay attention to people who need help. But your brother Alex taught me something important today about paying attention." "What did he teach you?" Emma asked. John looked at Alex, who was sitting on the edge of his mother's bed. "He taught me that being brave sometimes means doing scary things to take care of the people you love. And he taught me that having a lot of money doesn't matter much if you don't use it to help people who need it." Lisa had been listening to this exchange with growing emotion. "Alex," she said softly, "what exactly happened today?" Alex took a deep breath and told his mother about walking to the rich neighborhood, about watching the party, about taking food from the tables. But he also told her about John's kindness, about not getting in trouble, about the ride to the shelter, and all the food now being distributed to other families. When he finished, Lisa was crying quietly. "Baby, you could have been arrested. You could have been hurt." "But I wasn't, Mom. And now Mr. Miller wants to help us." Lisa looked at John through her tears. "I don't understand why you'd want to get involved in our problems. We're strangers to you." John thought about how to answer. "Mrs. Johnson, Lisa Johnson." "Lisa, can I tell you something? This morning I woke up in a house with 12 rooms, and I ate breakfast alone like I do every morning. I went to work in a building where hundreds of people work for me, but I don't really know any of them. Then I came home to throw a party for 50 people who are really just business associates, not true friends." John paused, looking around the small room where this family of 3 shared a space smaller than his walk-in closet. "But in this room right now, I see something I don't have in my big house. I see a family that loves each other, that takes care of each other, that sticks together no matter how hard things get." Alex risked getting arrested to feed his sister. "You've kept your family together through losing your jobs and your home and your health." Emma still plays with her doll and asks innocent questions even though her world has been turned upside down. Lisa was listening intently, though John could see that sitting up was exhausting her. "I have money, but you have something much more valuable. You have love and loyalty and courage. And I'd like to learn from you while I help you get back on your feet." "What kind of help?" Lisa asked quietly. "First, medical care. You need to see a doctor today, not next week or when the clinic has an opening. That cough sounds like it could be pneumonia, and that's dangerous if it's not treated properly." "I can't afford." "You don't need to afford it. I can afford it, and I want to afford it." Lisa looked uncertain, so John continued. "Second, I want to help you find stable housing. Not temporary, not with time limits, but a real home where your kids can have their own rooms and you can recover your health without worrying about where you'll sleep next month." "And what do you want in return?" Lisa asked, and John could hear years of disappointment and broken promises in her voice. "I want Alex to keep going to school, and maybe help me understand what life is really like for families like you. I want Emma to keep asking me honest questions that make me think about things differently. And I want you to get better and find work that uses your skills and pays you what you're worth." Emma climbed up onto her mother's bed. "Mama, I'm hungry," she said simply. Lisa's face crumpled. "I know, baby. I know." Alex immediately stood up. "I brought food, Emma. Mr. Miller brought enough for everyone." John reached into the bag he'd brought from the car. "Actually, I brought something special for Emma." He pulled out a small container. "Do you like pie, Emma?" The little girl's eyes went wide. Apple pie? Apple pie with ice cream. Emma looked at her mother for permission, and Lisa nodded, unable to speak. As Emma ate her pie with the focused concentration of a child who hadn't had dessert in months, John made arrangements on his phone. Within 30 minutes, he'd scheduled an appointment with one of the city's best internists, arranged for a car service to take Lisa to the appointment, and contacted a family friend who was a pediatrician to examine both children. "This is all happening so fast," Lisa said, watching John coordinate care for her family with an efficiency that came from years of managing complex business operations. "Sometimes when something needs to be fixed, the best approach is to move quickly," John replied. "But Lisa, I want you to know that you're in control here. If anything makes you uncomfortable, if you want me to back off, just say so." Lisa looked at her children, Alex, who was smiling for the first time in weeks, and Emma, who was savoring every bite of her pie, and John could see her making a decision. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, we'll accept your help. But I want to pay you back someday." "Deal," John said. "But right now, let's focus on getting you healthy and getting your family stable. The rest we can figure out later." As they prepared to leave for the medical appointments, John realized that his carefully planned Thanksgiving celebration had been completely abandoned. His guests were probably wondering where he'd gone. His staff was probably confused about his sudden disappearance. But for the first time in years, John felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 weeks later, John stood in the doorway of a furnished 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Queens, watching Lisa unpack the last box of belongings they'd accumulated since leaving Hope Haven. The transformation in the family had been remarkable, but it hadn't been without its challenges. Lisa's pneumonia had been caught just in time. Dr. Martinez had confirmed John's suspicions. Without treatment, her condition could have become life-threatening. The antibiotics and rest had worked wonders, and for the first time in months, Lisa was able to breathe easily and sleep through the night without coughing fits that scared the children. But the emotional healing had been more complex than the physical recovery. "Alex, come help me with these books," Lisa called from the living room, where she was arranging the children's school books on a shelf that John had purchased along with the rest of the apartment's furniture. Alex appeared from the bedroom he now shared with Emma, carrying a box of toys that various donors had contributed once word of the family's situation had spread through John's social circle. The boy had grown more confident in recent weeks, but John had noticed that he still hoarded food in his backpack and checked multiple times each night to make sure the front door was locked. "The books go on the bottom shelf," Lisa instructed. "Emma's picture books on the left, your school books on the right." John watched this ordinary domestic scene with satisfaction. 3 weeks ago, these children had been sleeping in a shelter, uncertain about where their next meal would come from. Now they were arranging their belongings in their own home, planning for school projects and weekend activities like any other family. But he'd also learned that the transition from homelessness to stability wasn't as simple as he'd initially thought. "Mr. Miller?" Emma's voice came from behind him. She'd started calling him that after Lisa had insisted on maintaining some formality, despite John's repeated invitations to call him by his first name. "Yes, Emma? Are you staying for dinner tonight?" It had become their routine. John would stop by after work to check on the family, help Alex with homework, and often end up staying for dinner. Lisa had insisted on cooking for him as a way to show gratitude, and John had discovered that her simple meals were far more satisfying than the expensive restaurant food he usually ate alone. "If your mom doesn't mind having me," John said. "She likes when you come," Emma confided, though she kept her voice low. "She smiles more when you're here." John felt a warmth in his chest at Emma's observation. The truth was, he looked forward to these visits more than he'd expected. After years of coming home to an empty penthouse, the noise and activity of family life had become addictive. "John?" Lisa called from the kitchen. "Could you help me reach something on the top shelf?" John walked into the small but efficiently organized kitchen, where Lisa was standing on her tiptoes trying to reach a serving bowl. Even at full health, she was barely 5 feet tall, and the apartment's standard cabinets were clearly designed by someone much taller. "Here," John said, easily reaching the bowl she needed. "I should have thought about cabinet height when we were looking at apartments." "It's perfect," Lisa said firmly. "This whole place is perfect. I just need to get used to having so much space." John looked around the kitchen. which was smaller than his penthouse's pantry, and marveled at Lisa's perspective. What seemed impossibly cramped to him represented luxury and security to her family. "Lisa, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How are you really doing with all this? I know the transition has been fast, and I want to make sure you're comfortable with how things are going." Lisa was quiet for a moment, stirring something on the stove that smelled incredible. "Can I be honest with you?" "Please do." "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm convinced this is all a dream, that I'm going to open my eyes and we'll be back in that shelter room, or worse, back in our car with nowhere to go." John felt his heart clench. "What can I do to help you feel more secure?" "You've already done more than anyone has a right to expect," Lisa said, turning to face him. "The apartment, the medical care, helping me find a job. It's like winning the lottery. But I keep waiting for the catch." "What kind of catch?" "The part where you decide this is too much work, or too expensive, or just not worth the trouble. The part where you remember that we're not really your family and you have your own life to live." John understood her fear. Lisa had been disappointed by the system, by employers, probably by Alex's father and other people who'd made promises they didn't keep. Why should she trust that he was different? "Lisa, I want to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." She nodded, giving him her full attention. 3 weeks ago, I was one of the loneliest people in New York. I had everything money could buy, but I didn't have anything that really mattered. I didn't have people who were excited to see me when I came home. I didn't have anyone who needed me or anyone I truly needed. John paused, collecting his thoughts. "Your family changed that. Alex's courage, Emma's honesty, your strength in the face of impossible circumstances. You've given me something I didn't even realize I was missing. You've given me purpose." "But what happens when the novelty wears off?" Lisa asked quietly. "What happens when helping us becomes just another obligation instead of something that makes you feel good about yourself?" It was a fair question, and John respected her for asking it directly. "I don't know," he admitted. "I can't predict how I'll feel in a year or 5 years. But I can tell you that this doesn't feel like novelty or obligation. It feels like family." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "John, we're not your family. You don't owe us anything. If you want to step back, to have your old life back—" "I don't want my old life back," John interrupted. "My old life was empty. This life, with you and Alex and Emma in it, is full." They were interrupted by Alex running into the kitchen. "Mom, Emma's crying because she can't find Mr. Bear," he announced. Mr. Bear was Emma's stuffed animal, the one she'd been playing with at the shelter. It had been a constant companion through all their moves and changes. "I'll look for him," Lisa said, immediately shifting into mother mode. "I'll help," John offered. They found Mr. Bear wedged behind Emma's new bed, and her relief was immediate and complete. As John watched Lisa comfort her daughter, he realized something important. These weren't people he was helping out of obligation or even generosity. These were people he cared about deeply, people whose happiness and security mattered to him as much as his own. Later that evening, after dinner and homework and bedtime stories, John and Lisa sat on the small couch in the living room, drinking coffee and talking quietly while the children slept. "I have something to tell you," Lisa said, her voice nervous. "What is it?" "I got the job, the one at the community center. They called today." John felt a surge of pride and excitement. Lisa had been interviewing for a position as a family services coordinator, work that would use her own experiences with homelessness and poverty to help other families navigate the system. "Lisa, that's wonderful. When do you start?" "Next Monday." "And John?" She paused, looking down at her hands. "The salary is enough for rent and groceries and everything we need. I won't need your financial help anymore." John felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in Lisa's achievement, excitement for her independence, and, if he was honest, a little fear about what this might mean for their relationship. "How do you feel about that?" he asked. Terrified and excited and grateful all at the same time. Lisa looked up at him. "I want to be able to take care of my kids myself, but I also don't want to lose you. You've become important to us. "You're not going to lose me," John said firmly. "My involvement in your lives was never just about money. It was about being part of something bigger than myself. But what if things change? What if independence changes how we relate to each other?" John thought about this. Their relationship had begun with his rescue of her family from desperate circumstances. What would it become when they no longer needed rescuing? "Maybe it'll become something even better," he said. "Maybe it'll become a real friendship between equals instead of a relationship based on one person helping another." Lisa smiled, the first truly relaxed smile John had seen from her since they'd met. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like us to be real friends." As John drove home to his penthouse that night, he realized that Lisa's job offer represented more than just financial independence for her family. It represented a test of whether their relationship could evolve beyond its origins in crisis and charity. He hoped it could. Because over the past 3 weeks, he'd discovered that having people to care about, people who cared about him in return, was worth more than all the money in his bank accounts. And tomorrow, he would start finding out if that feeling was mutual. 1 year later, John stood in his backyard again, but this time everything was different. The perfectly manicured lawn was dotted with picnic blankets and folding chairs. Children ran between the tables, laughing and playing games that had been organized by volunteers. The white-clothed tables still held an abundance of food, but now they were surrounded by families from Hope Haven, other local shelters, and community organizations. This was John's second annual Thanksgiving celebration, but the guest list had changed dramatically. "Mr. Miller! Mr. Miller! Look how high I can jump!" Emma's voice called out from across the yard. John turned to see her bouncing on a small trampoline he'd rented for the children's area. At 7 years old, she'd grown several inches and gained the healthy weight that came from regular meals and security. Her hair was now adorned with colorful barrettes, and she wore a new dress that she'd picked out herself during a recent shopping trip. "Very impressive," John called back, giving her a thumbs up that made her beam with pride. Nearby, Alex was helping serve food to other families, moving with the confidence of a 10-year-old who knew his place in the world. He'd grown taller and stronger over the past year, but more importantly, he'd learned to trust that the adults in his life would take care of him instead of the other way around. He was still responsible and caring, but now he got to be a child too. "John, we're running low on the vegetarian options," Lisa said, approaching with a clipboard in her hand. She was coordinating the volunteer efforts with the efficiency she'd brought to her job at the community center. Her work helping other families navigate the system had given her a sense of purpose that radiated from her confident posture and easy smile. "I'll get more from the kitchen," John replied, but Lisa was already delegating the task to one of the other volunteers. "Already handled," she said with a grin. "Mrs. Garcia is bringing out another tray of her famous black bean casserole." Mrs. Garcia, the former teacher from Hope Haven, had become one of the regular volunteers at John's foundation. She'd found stable housing through the organization's programs, and now used her teaching skills to run literacy classes for both children and adults in the community. "How many families are we serving today?" John asked, looking out at the crowd that had grown significantly from his original 50 business associates. 87 families, Lisa said, consulting her clipboard. "Plus about 40 volunteers. We're feeding close to 400 people." John shook his head in amazement. What had started as a personal response to meeting one hungry child had grown into something he'd never imagined. The Miller Family Foundation, established 6 months after that first Thanksgiving, now operated year-round programs including emergency housing assistance, job training, healthcare coordination, and educational support. But the foundation was just the formal structure. The real change had been in John himself. "Dad!" Emma's voice called out, and John's heart still skipped a beat at the word. It had started gradually, first as a question, "Can I call you Dad?" Then tentatively, then with the complete confidence of a child who'd never doubted his place in her life. The adoption had been finalized 3 months earlier. Lisa had initially resisted the idea, worried about changing the dynamic of their relationship. But Alex had been the one to suggest it, pointing out that John had been acting like their father for months anyway, so why not make it official? "Dad, there's a new family that just arrived," Emma said, tugging on John's sleeve. "The little girl looks scared, and the boy reminds me of how Alex used to look." John followed Emma's gaze to see a woman with 3 children standing uncertainly at the edge of the celebration. The mother looked exhausted and overwhelmed, while the children, 2 boys and a girl, all under 10, stayed close to her side with the wariness that John had learned to recognize in families who'd recently experienced homelessness. "Should we go say hello?" John asked Emma. "Yes, but let's bring Alex too. He's really good at talking to scared kids." John found Alex helping an elderly man navigate the buffet line and called him over. Together, the 3 of them approached the new family. "Hi," John said to the mother, extending his hand. "I'm John Miller. Welcome to our Thanksgiving celebration." The woman shook his hand cautiously. "I'm Maria Santos. Someone at the shelter said you were having a meal for families?" "We are, and we're glad you're here." John knelt down to be at eye level with the children. "What are your names?" The oldest boy, probably around 9, stepped slightly forward. "I'm David. This is my brother Carlos and my sister Anna." John felt a familiar tug of recognition. David had the same protective stance that Alex had exhibited when they'd first met. The same way of positioning himself between his siblings and potential danger. "Well, David, Carlos, and Anna, I think you're going to like it here. There's lots of food, games for kids, and some really friendly people. Would you like Alex to show you around?" Alex stepped forward with the easy confidence he'd developed over the past year. "I know exactly how you feel," he told David quietly. "When I first came here, I was really scared too. But Mr. Miller, my dad, he's one of the good guys, and there's really good food." John watched Alex guide the Santos children toward the food tables, pointing out the best options and introducing them to other kids. Lisa appeared at John's side and began talking with Maria Santos about housing resources and job opportunities, with the same gentle expertise she'd brought to dozens of other families over the past year. "Excuse me, are you John Miller?" John turned to find a young man, probably in his early 20s, standing behind him with a nervous expression. "I am. And you are?" "My name is Marcus Thompson. I think you helped my family about 8 years ago. My mom is Sandra Thompson. We were living in our car, and you paid for us to get an apartment and help my mom find work." John searched his memory. In the years since meeting Alex's family, he'd helped numerous families, but he tried to remember each one. Sandra Thompson. Didn't she work at the community college? Marcus's face lit up. "Yes, she's an administrator there now. She's been working there for 6 years." "That's wonderful. How is your mom?" "She's doing great. She bought her own house last year." Marcus paused, looking emotional. "But I'm not here to talk about Mom. I'm here to talk about me. What about you?" "I just graduated from college. Full scholarship to NYU. Thanks to the tutoring program your foundation funded when I was in high school. And now I want to work for you." John felt a warmth spreading through his chest. "What kind of work?" "I want to do what you do. I want to help families like his was, Marcus said, pointing toward Alex. "I studied social work and nonprofit management because I wanted to learn how to make a difference the way you did for us." Before John could respond, he felt small arms wrapping around his waist. Emma had returned from welcoming the Santos family and was claiming his attention. "Dad, Mrs. Garcia says it's time for the Thankful Circle," she announced. The Thankful Circle had become a tradition at John's Thanksgiving celebrations. Instead of one person giving a speech about gratitude, they formed a large circle, and anyone who wanted to share what they were thankful for could speak. As nearly 400 people arranged themselves in an enormous circle on the lawn, John found himself standing between Lisa and Alex, with Emma in front of him and dozens of families he'd come to know over the past year surrounding them. "I'd like to start this year," John said when the circle quieted. "Last year, I talked about how Alex taught me the meaning of courage and how his family showed me what real love looks like. This year, I want to talk about community." He looked around the circle, seeing faces he'd come to know well. Families who'd found stability, volunteers who'd discovered purpose, children who'd learned that they were worthy of care and attention. "When Alex took food from my table last year, I thought I was going to help one family. But what really happened is that one family taught me how to build a community. They taught me that helping others isn't about charity or feeling good about yourself. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that we all need each other." John's voice grew stronger as he continued. Every person in this circle has something to offer and something to receive. We're not here because some people are helpers and others need help. We're here because we're family, and family takes care of each other. The circle continued around the lawn, with person after person sharing stories of gratitude, recovery, hope, and community. When it reached Alex, the 10-year-old stood up straight and spoke with clarity. "I'm thankful that stealing food from a rich guy's party turned out to be the best thing I ever did," he said, getting laughs from around the circle. "But mostly I'm thankful that I learned the difference between taking something because you have to and receiving something because people love you." When it was Lisa's turn, she looked directly at John. "I'm thankful for learning that accepting help doesn't make you weak, it makes you part of something bigger. And I'm thankful for discovering that family can be chosen, not just born." Emma, when her turn came, simply said, "I'm thankful for my dad and for having enough food and for Mr. Bear and for not being scared anymore." As the afternoon wore on and families began to leave with containers of leftover food and information about the Foundation's programs, John found himself cleaning up alongside the same volunteers who'd helped serve. These weren't hired caterers or staff. These were friends, community members, people who'd become as invested in this work as he was. "So," Lisa said, as they packed up the last of the serving dishes, "what are you thinking about for next year?" John looked around his backyard, imagining it filled with even more families, more children playing games, more stories of hope and recovery being shared. "I'm thinking we might need a bigger space," he said. Alex appeared at his side, carrying a box of leftover dinner rolls. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you think there are other kids out there like I was? Kids who might be too scared to ask for help?" John put his arm around his son's shoulders. "I'm sure there are." "Then maybe we should go find them instead of waiting for them to find us." John smiled, recognizing the same generous spirit that had led Alex to worry about his family, even when he was hungry himself. The same courage that had driven him to take risks to help the people he loved. "I think that's an excellent idea," John said. "Want to help me figure out how to do that?" As the sun set over the backyard where John had once hosted gatherings for business associates who barely knew each other, he felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. He was surrounded by people who'd chosen to be family with each other. People who'd learned that the most important things in life couldn't be bought. They had to be shared. The young boy who'd stolen food from his Thanksgiving table had given John something far more valuable than anything he'd lost that day. He'd given him a purpose, a family, and a community that would last for generations. And somewhere in the city, there were probably other children who needed someone to notice them, to see past their desperate actions to their generous hearts. Tomorrow, John and his family would start looking for them. But tonight, they would go home together, full of food and gratitude and the quiet joy that comes from knowing you belong to something bigger than yourself.